Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam, and today we are going to be talking about why S&P 500 index funds are not the best investment out there. But before we continue, make sure you hit that thumbs up so that the YouTube algorithm knows that we like these videos and so that I can keep making these videos for you guys. As you all know, S&P 500 index funds are a very important part of the market. Lots of people are invested in them and they are great investments in general. So why am I telling you that these are not the best? Well, before we go there, let's talk about why they're really good. They have high yields. They produce long-term wealth. You kind of set it and forget it. It'll modulate for you, picking the largest companies, making sure that the largest companies are included in the index. And when a company gets too small, it gets kicked out. So for example, recent ones that got included are like Tesla. When they got big enough and they made enough money multiple quarters in a row, they got included in the S&P 500. I don't remember what company they replaced, but a company that was too small, didn't make enough earnings, got kicked out of the S&P 500. And that kind of makes sure that your gains keep going in the long run. But why am I telling you that the S&P 500 index funds are a bad choice? They also have really low expense ratios, so you pay very little in terms of fees. So why is it a bad choice? It's a bad choice because they include fossil fuels. Fossil fuel companies such as ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, these big giants of the old world are still in the S&P 500 because they're not tiny companies yet. However, they are slowly dying on their own and they're not gaining in value. And this is something that has been happening over a long period of time. Why are we so concerned about this? Because of climate change. It's obvious now that climate change is real. It's doing real damage, damaging the economy, damaging gains, causing problems for agriculture all across the world, from grapes, causing wine yields to be damaged. I saw that on 60 Minutes. Coffee yields get damaged. Growing things in California, certain crops aren't able to be grown anymore in California unless you have senior water rights. There have been devastating floods, hurricanes, off-season tornadoes, all kinds of stuff has been going on. I heard that Siberia is melting. We've seen Alaska reaching 68 degrees. And all of this is bad for the economy because it's doing damage to the things that make money. It's also doing damage to people's ability to survive. There's coastal flooding, there's Miami flooding, there's New York got flooded. All of this economic damage from being down and out of work, from things that need to be repaired. So these fossil fuel companies are not only not adding value, they're actually subtracting value from how the world needs to run. Obviously, these fossil fuel companies may not go away entirely because we do need plastics and stuff like that, but I would argue that these companies would be much smaller in the future. So instead of the S&P 500 index fund, what would I advocate buying instead? Of course, this is not financial advice. I suggest that you do your own due diligence and your own research because I am not a financial advisor, just a financial enthusiast. So the first one that I want to look at is SPYX, SPYX. SPYX is a exchange traded fund that includes no fossil fuel reserves. So that means that the SPYX fund does not hold any companies that own any fossil fuel that's still in the ground. That includes coal companies, natural gas, oil, etc. So this fund only has 0.5% of the fund invested in fossil fuel reserves. And I imagine that the company that's holding that fossil fuel reserve will get eliminated from the fund eventually when they notice it, or if that one company is actually trying to get rid of their fossil fuel reserves, maybe that would be a reason why they're staying in. However, the S&P 500 as a whole has 2% of the fund invested in fossil fuel companies that hold fossil fuel reserves. And the majority of these companies that are on that list, that are included in the S&P 500 and not included in the SPYX fund, these companies have lost money or have underperformed the S&P 500 over the last 10 years. So these companies are actually dragging down the yield of the S&P 500. So by that measure, if we had gotten rid of these companies, then the fund would actually perform better. SPYX does have some downsides. It does have a higher expense ratio. That means you pay higher fees on the money that's invested. And it also still contains some companies that are involved in fossil fuels, just companies that are doing things such as parts or maintenance. Now, these companies will probably decline over the long run as well, so I would urge them to find a way to get rid of these companies as well. Or if you guys know of any ETFs or funds that are entirely exclude all of these fossil fuel companies, including parts and maintenance that are involved in this industry, I would love to know if there's a S&P 500 fund out there that tracks everything else, but just excludes this sector. I think that would be a great thing to have. I'm actually going to put up on the screen here the yield of some of the largest fossil fuel companies that are excluded. You can see that companies such as ExxonMobil, their annualized return over the past 10 years is 0.9%. That means you didn't even outperform inflation over the last 10 years. So that's absolutely garbage. I would have rather had my money in something else. And there are even worse ones on the list, such as APA. This company has actually lost value, an average of 10% a year over the last 10 years. So if you had put $10,000 in this company 10 years ago, you'd be left with $3,400 or so. Terrible investment. And you can see on this entire list, the only company that has outperformed the S&P 500 as a whole is this company called FANG, Diamondback Energy, outperforming it by a hair. But that's just not enough to justify holding on to these fossil fuel companies. Now, I have to give you more options than this just one. The next one is PARWX. It's a Parnasus investor Endeavour fund. Basically, this fund tries to make investments to meet or match the gains of the market without sacrificing the yield. So basically, this company does have a sustainability mandate, which means that they avoid carbon-intensive industries, and they're a member of the Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment. So I do think that as investors, we do have some responsibility to make sure that we're not pushing for continued fossil fuel expansion, which is what an investment in ExxonMobil is kind of advocating for. PARWX, they're also a large cap mutual fund. So they basically invest in companies that are $10 billion or larger. And they also finally have 0% fossil fuel holdings, which is what kind of got me into this fund in the first place. They do have a higher expense ratio, 0.94%, but their yields have been pretty good. We'll talk about yields in a minute. Finally, two more options for you. They're very similar to each other, so I'm going to lump them together. VGT and FTEC. These are both technology ETFs, so they track the technology sector. And this fund holds things like Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, a lot of tech companies, which have been performing very well in the past few years. So this has definitely beaten the S&P 500 and definitely has beaten the fossil fuel sector as a whole. So these are my choices for funds that you can purchase. And we can look at a little bit at the yields since this is what everyone's interested in. We want to make sure that our money is doing the work when it's sitting around. So the first year, 1 year gains on SWPPX, which is a regular S&P 500 fund from Schwab, which is a very large brokerage. Over the past year, it's gained 31.3%. VGT, 31.01%. PARWX outperforming both of them, 35.3%. SPYX outperforming even more at 40.9%. And FTEC at 44%. Now you can look at 5-year SWPPX, S&P 500 at 17.8, VGT at 30.7, and so same thing with FTEC, 30.8%. PARWX at almost 17%, so a little bit underperforming there on the 5-year range. And then the SPYX at 18.31%. I think that SPYX, as time goes on, it'll continue to outperform in larger and larger margins just because the fossil fuel industry, in my opinion, will continue to decline. 10-year wise, FTEC and SPYX haven't been around that long, but we can see that PARWX has actually outperformed, and so has VGT. Now, like I mentioned a little bit before, there are a little bit of downsides to these, such as the fee. SPYX has 0.2%, PARWX 0.94%, and FTEC at 0.08%. However, because of the sustainability on these funds, I think it is worthy of your consideration and has been worthy of my investment over the past few years to make sure that I take a sustainable view in terms of where my money is going and how it's doing the work. And hopefully you'll consider these as well. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell notification icon so that you get notified when all of the videos come out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.